All right, let's begin on passage 2. So I'll go ahead and scroll again slowly to the bottom to give you the chance to read on your own and pause incrementally. If you'd prefer for me not to read. And go back up and I'll read it aloud. All right. The horseless carriage was just arriving in San Francisco, and its debut was turning into one of those colorfully unmitigated disasters that bring misery to everyone but historians. Consumers were staying away from the devilish contraptions in droves. In San Francisco in 1903, the horse and buggy was not going the way of the horse and buggy. For good reason. The automobile, so sleekly efficient on paper, was in practice a civic menace. Belching out exhaust, kicking up storms of dust, becoming hopelessly mired in the most innocuous-looking puddles, and tying up horse traffic. Incensed local lawmakers responded with monuments to legislative creativity. The laws of at least one town required automobile drivers to stop, get out, and fire off Roman candles every time horse-drawn vehicles came into view. Massachusetts tried, and, fortunately, failed to mandate that cars be equipped with bells that would ring with each revolution of the wheels. In some towns, police were authorized to disable passing cars with ropes, chains, and wires. San Francisco didn't escape the legislative wave. Bitter local officials pushed through an ordinance banning automobiles from all tourist areas, effectively exiling them from the city. Nor were these the only obstacles. The asking price for the cheapest automobile amounted to twice the $500 annual salary of the average citizen. Some cost 3 times that much. And all that bought you was 4 wheels, a body, and an engine. Accessories, like bumpers, carburetors, and headlights, had to be purchased separately. Navigation was a nightmare. The first of San Francisco's road signs were only just being erected, hammered up by an enterprising insurance underwriter who hoped to win clients by posting directions into the countryside, where drivers retreated for automobile picnic parties held out of the view of angry townsfolk. The first automobiles imported to San Francisco had so little power that they rarely made it up the hills. The grade, that's a typo, meant to say grade, the grade of 19th Avenue was so daunting for the engines of the day that watching automobiles straining for the top became a local pastime. Passage B. In the mid-1950s, Ford Motor Company was building not 1, not 2, but 18 varieties of Edsel, including a convertible and a station wagon. The designers came up with some interesting ideas. They created a push-button transmission and put it in the middle of the steering wheel, where most cars have a horn, and they fiddled with the front end. Where other cars had horizontal chrome grills, the Edsel would have a vertical chrome oval in its grill. It was new. It was different. Unfortunately, it didn't work. It couldn't suck in enough air to cool the engine. They had to keep opening that oval to get more air in there, says Jim Arnold, who was a trainee in Edsel's design shop, and it didn't look as good. Edsel didn't have its own assembly lines, so the cars were produced in Ford and Mercury plants, which caused problems. Every once in a while, an Edsel would roll past workers who were used to Mercurys or other Fords. Confused, they sometimes failed to install all the parts before the Edsel moved on down the line. Cars without parts can be a problem, of course, but other aspects of the Edsel juggernaut worked perfectly. The height, for instance. The Edsel PR team touted the glories of the cars, but wouldn't let anybody see them. When they finally released a photo, it turned out to be a picture of the Edsel's hood ornament, and hundreds of publications actually printed it. On September 4th, 1957, proclaimed by Ford as E-Day, nearly 3 million Americans flocked to showrooms to see the Edsel. Unfortunately, very few of them bought the Edsel. We couldn't even get people to drive it, says C. Gail Warnock, Edsel's public relations director. They just didn't like the car. They just didn't like the front end. But styling was hardly the worst problem. Oil pans fell off, trunks stuck, paint peeled, doors failed to close, and the much-hyped Teletouch push-button transmission had a distressing tendency to freeze up. People joked that Edsel stood for "every day something else leaks." Another major problem was caused by bad luck. The Edsel was an upscale car launched a couple months after a stock market plunge caused a recession. Sales of all premium cars plummeted. Before E-Day, Edsel's hypemeisters promised to sell 200,000 cars the first year. Actually, they sold 63,110. Sales dropped below 45,000 the second year, and only 2,846 of the 1960 models sold before Ford pulled the plug. Okay, so let's get to the questions now. Question 11. Which of the following statements about automobiles in San Francisco in 1903 is best supported by Passage A? A. They were affordable for the average citizen, but unpopular nevertheless. So, certainly they were not affordable during this time, so just by that first statement, we can already rule out statement A. They were very expensive. They were twice the average annual salary, as they mentioned in the passage. B. They were used more by tourists for sightseeing purposes than by citizens for practical purposes. That's somewhat true, but it wasn't really totally elaborated on in Passage A. It was focused more on the legislative aspect of it. C. They failed to capture the public imagination in spite of huge public relations efforts. So that wasn't really Passage A, that was more Passage B. D. They were considered a public nuisance by all but a small segment of the population. So D would be the most well supported by Passage A simply because of all of the repeated mentions, devilish contraptions in the first paragraph, the civic menace mentioned in the second paragraph. That was kind of the main focus, was on the negative aspects and the nuisance aspects of the automobiles. So D would be most well supported by Passage A. 12. Which of the following terms in Passage A is used more figuratively than literally? Puddles, line 11. So we can go to line 11. Kicking up storms of dust, becoming hopelessly mired in the most innocuous looking puddles. So that seems to be a literal use of the word puddles. It's them getting stuck in physical puddles. Monuments, line 13. Incensed local lawmakers responded with monuments to legislative creativity. So the laws. So these are laws. So monuments to legislative creativity is sort of a bit of a sarcastic dig at the local lawmakers. They're responding to the annoyance of the cars with extraordinarily creative laws, which are monuments to legislative creativity. So this would certainly be a use of figurative language here. They're not literally constructing a monument to legislative creativity. They're constructing a law. So that would definitely be more figurative than literal. Let's double check the other two answers to ensure that none of them are better. H, bells, line 18. Tried and unfortunately failed to demand that the cars be equipped with bells that would ring with each revolution of the wheels. So that seems to be a literal use of the word bells, so not figurative. So not that. Hills, line 39. Let's go down there real quick. The first automobiles imported to San Francisco had so little power that they rarely made it up the hills. So that seems to be a literal use as well. So the most appropriate answer for this would be G, monuments, line 13. All right, question 13. The purpose of the quotation marks around the word accessories in line 29 is most likely to. So let's go to line 29 and see exactly what that was. So read a little bit before that to get context. Nor were these the only obstacles. The asking price for the cheapest automobile amounted to twice the $500 annual salary of the average citizen. Some cost 3 times that much, and all that bought you was 4 wheels, a body, and an engine. Accessories like bumpers, carburetors, and headlights had to be purchased separately. So it's sort of a sarcastic use of the word accessories. These are not really accessories. These are modern day necessities in a car and should have been virtually necessities then. So that quote is used sarcastically. So the answers are A, suggest that the features were actually essentials. So that's pretty close to what we were saying. Let's see if some of the other answer choices are better. B, indicate that the word appeared in legal documents. That makes absolutely no sense as an answer choice. That's just there to throw you off. So C, emphasize that the word was widely misunderstood. No, that's from the context we can see that that's not what they thought. D, clarify that inexpensive automobiles had some luxury features. So it's actually saying that they're not included, first of all, and that answer isn't really applicable. So the clearest is the sarcastic use of the word accessories in suggesting that the features were actually essentials. So sarcastically, accessories, but they're not actually accessories. So A is the best answer choice for that question. Questions 14 through 17 ask about passage B. Okay. 14. Which of the following statements best captures how passage B characterizes the failure of the Edsel? It happened gradually and went unnoticed at the time by the public. It happened quickly, despite promising initial sales. It was on a huge scale, occurred swiftly, and was a public event of sorts. It occurred when other automakers were doing well and therefore embarrassed Ford all the more. So, the entirety of passage B, if you wanted, you could look back, but if you were reading carefully, you would recall that the passage was detailing the failure, and it was certainly in the public eye. It was heavily encouraged by public relations. It was heavily publicized, so it certainly was not unnoticed at the time by the public. It certainly is not F. That discounts that. It happened quickly despite promising initial sales. So the sales actually were never promising. They were always disappointing, and we can go back down to the sales figures to double check that. They were expecting 200,000 cars the first year down here on line 88, and actually they sold 63,110. So the sales figures were never promising, so that discounts that answer choice. H, it was on a huge scale, occurred swiftly, and was a public event of sorts. That's pretty close to what it seemed to be, as with all the publicity and everything. J, it occurred when other automakers were doing well and therefore embarrassed Ford all the more. So if you recall, one of the explanations they gave for why an additional reason why it failed, in addition to that it was a terrible car, was that there was a recession. So here, paragraph beginning on line 83, major problem was caused by bad luck. Upscale car launched a couple months after a stock market plunge caused a recession. Sales of all premium cars plummeted. So the others weren't really doing well. They were just doing even worse, the Edsel. So H is the best answer for 14. Number 15. The statement in lines 43 through 45 is typical of passage B and the way it, so we can read that again. In the mid-1950s, Ford Motor Company was building not one, not two, but 18 varieties of Edsel, including a convertible and a station wagon. So it's sort of a bit of mocking the excess and the absurdity of Ford in making this luxury car that was just thoroughly ridiculous and impractical and that no one wanted to actually drive. So in the way it contrasts data about the Edsel with data about other cars of the 1950s, it certainly doesn't even do that, and that wasn't really typical of passage B either. So that was part of the question as well. B conveys the obligation that Ford executives felt to involve customers in the design of the Edsel. That doesn't make sense as a question. That can be anytime there's just a confusing answer in there, it's just kind of meant to throw you off. That isn't really related to anything that's near the portion of the passage that they're asking you to look at. C combines an industry perspective on the Edsel with that of the typical consumer. It certainly doesn't do that. It's just a description of how many varieties of the Edsel there are. D suggests the entire Edsel enterprise was marked by extremes. It certainly does do that. It's the excess of Edsel in producing 18 entire varieties, and that was sort of the theme throughout. So that's definitely typical of passage B, is that it's continually reiterating the extreme nature of the Edsel enterprise. So D is the right answer there. 16. Which of the following events referred to in passage B occurred first chronologically? E-Day ended. So E-Day, if you recall, was the day that Edsel was released. The stock market plunged. So it was part of the bad luck that they had was that the stock market had actually plunged before the release of the car. So we know that the stock market happened before E-Day, and we could go back to the passage to where that happened. Another major problem was caused by bad luck. Upstill launched a couple months after the recession. So we know that occurred before that chronologically. G occurred before F. So right now our winner is G, and let's see if any of the others are are before. Edsel sales dropped below 45,000. It certainly couldn't have had sales before it was released, so that's certainly after E-Day and after the stock market plunge. Edsel sales reached 2846. It reached 2846 even after it reached 45,000, and again, it couldn't have had sales before it was released. So G is the correct answer here. 17. As it is used in the passage, the term premium cars, line 86, serves primarily as a, okay, let's go down to line 86 and read that. So read the preceding sentence for a little bit of background again. The Edsel was an upscale car launched a couple months after a stock market plunge caused a recession. Sales of all premium cars plummeted. Okay, so all of the kind of more expensive cars that people weren't willing to pay as much money for in a recession naturally dropped. So these premium cars are just sort of more expensive, nicer cars. Okay, so the term premium cars serves primarily as a reference to what Edsels have become now that they're valued antiques. No, because they were premium at the time. It was the sales of premium cars at the time of release. So it has nothing to do with the current time. It's during this time in the 1950s. So it's not A. B. Name for a type of car that was ushered in by the makers of Edsel. No, it's certainly not a name for a type of car. It's an adjective to describe the sort of car that it was. It's not really a proper name, so it's not B. C. Label for a category of cars that the makers of the Edsel intended it to belong to. And that's slightly more accurate. So it's not a name. It's more of a category. It's more of a description of the general sort of car that it is premium, and they intended it for it to be a premium car. So that's a pretty good answer. Let's see if D is better. Derisive term used sarcastically by Edsel owners who were disappointed in their purchase. So that could be the case, and they very well may have done it, but it may have used the term premium sarcastically, but actually in the context of where it is, it's just matter of fact saying sales of all premium cars plummeted. It's not really saying it sarcastically. It's just saying that's what happened. These types of cars that were more expensive, their sales plummeted. So it is, in fact, answer choice C for question 17. 18 through 20 ask about both passages. 18. The similarity between the two passages is that they both, F, examine their topics from a significant distance of time. They're both certainly from earlier time periods. Whether or not it's significant that's sort of a relative term, but they certainly are both historical, and that is a similarity. So we'll see if some of the other choices are better. G, reveal the author's professional background as a way of lending credibility to the text. Neither one did that ever. The authors never mentioned themselves at all. So that one's not correct. H, assert that automobiles have contributed little that is worthwhile to society. So the first one did a little bit of that, but it was mostly in the context of history and not really modern, so neither one of them actually really asserted that automobiles haven't contributed to society. So they certainly don't share that similarity. And J, incorporate information about traffic and road conditions into a discussion of automobile design. So the first one talked about a little bit about the laws. I was going to say talked maybe a little bit about the traffic, but it was more talking about the legislation that was passed. So, and the second passage didn't really directly discuss the traffic and road conditions. They talked about automobile design, but it didn't talk about traffic and road conditions. So that one is not correct. So actually F is the similarity, or one of the similarities that they share. So that is the correct answer. 19. An element of passage A that is not present in passage B is a reference to what aspect of the automobile culture? A, related legislation. B, so actually A, they certainly mentioned legislation in passage A when they were talking about they give the fairly vivid examples of the Roman candles being needed to set off in certain municipalities. So that would certainly be in passage A. I don't recall that being in passage B, so most likely that will be our answer. We can double check to be sure. B, public opinion. So actually, public opinion was an element of both passages. So public opinion was talked about how basically everyone hated the early automobiles in the first passage, and public opinion was talked about in how basically everyone hated the Edsel. So that was an element that was common to both. So that wouldn't be exclusive to passage A. So B would not be correct. C, economics. Actually, passage B contained more economics than passage A, as it's talking more about the sale of the specific automobile and about the recession. So actually, C would be more B than A, so certainly the answer is not C. D, quotations from industry experts. So there are a couple of quotes from industry experts in passage B, it looks like. Or at least quotes from members of Ford, like on line 73, C. Gail Warnock, the public relations director. So certainly that's an element of passage B, so that wouldn't be exclusive to A. So we find out that A is actually our correct answer. 20. If publicity experts had been assigned to build enthusiasm for the cars mentioned in passage A, using the methods described in passage B, the experts would most likely have first released photos to the press that showed F, cars going up 19th Avenue in San Francisco. So if you recall, the publicity method they mentioned was the very small image of the car. Let me see if I can find it in the text. Right here on line 65. The 65 and onwards, the Edsel PR team touted the glories of the cars, but wouldn't let anybody see them. When they finally released a photo, it turned out to be a picture of the Edsel's hood ornament, and hundreds of publications actually printed it. So that was their PR attempt. Those were the publicity experts. So that was what they did in passage B. So if they were to repeat that in passage A, they might do cars going up 19th Avenue in San Francisco. No, that doesn't really have anything to do with that. G, a single detail such as a gleaming headlight or a polished door handle, that would be roughly comparable. It would be a very small snapshot of the car, so that's a pretty closely related idea. H, the meticulous work done along the assembly line to ensure the quality of the new car, that has nothing to do with any of the publicity methods in passage B, so H is incorrect. J, an attractive young couple smiling as they enjoy a car ride past horses grazing in pastures. Anytime you read something a little bit ridiculous like that clearly has nothing to do with the passage, you can kind of immediately discount that and just sort of shake your head. So G is certainly the best answer here. All right. Thank you for listening. Hopefully that was helpful. And one of the things that can really help with these types of tests is just familiarity with the types of questions they're asking, going over it yourself, verifying everything for yourself, and seeing if you can come up with the answers and the reasoning behind it. And the foundation is laid first, and the speed comes later. But the reasoning process behind it is the most important to develop initially. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.